I will introduce the panel in this order. Is first Marcelo Cortes Neri, Chief Minister, Secretaria de Assuntos Estratégicos da Presidência da República do Brasil. Mr. Jorge Gerdau Johan Petter, Chairman of the Board of Directors de Gerdau. Mr. Vicky Colbert, Executive Director from Fundación Escuela Nueva, Colombia. And Professor Sergio Suarez Correa, teacher from José Urbina López Primary School from Mexico. I would like to, gostaria de começar com a senhora.
I will begin with Mrs. Colbert explaining to us exactly what is so interesting in your initiative, Escuela Nueva, in Colombia. And besides, how can this be multiplied to so many countries in Latin America?
Thank you. First of all,
Escuela Nueva en Colombia comenzó en las zonas rurales. En las zonas rurales se convirtió en política.
Into public policies at the end of the 80s in 20,000 schools. And when the World Bank covers one of the three innovations that had impacted the public policies in many countries, has come to inspire themselves in the Colombian experience and had taken to many countries through the governments and multilateral organizations like the World Bank, the Development Bank, UNICEF, and many organizations. Here in Brazil was called the Escuela Activa in the rural schools, multi-grade schools. In Mexico, we work in Puebla, in Guatemala. So this has been taken to many countries, and recently the Vietnamese government, after piloting it during 2 years, has decided politically to take it to all schools, rural and urban schools. This is one of the innovations that was able to survive the political changes, because we have learned that we have to work with the governments to get an impact on public, but we have to have those public-private partnerships with the coffee producers in the rural area. But I had to create an NGO to sustain it. You need the private sector for the quality and sustainability, and the public to the high impact. I'm talking about the trajectory and not what consists.
What is the difference between the traditional schools we are accustomed to and the school that you co-founded? And beyond that, please elaborate on the importance of the upbringing and capacity of a...
When we started, it was in the rural areas and the multi-serial areas that are invisible.
Trabajar simultáneamente con primero, segundo, tercero, cuarto, quinto.
Different grades and manage the diversity. And this was a source of innovation, because we had to challenge the traditional model, education model that we know, the teacher that transmit information to the classroom. And we challenge this model, and we reach two very important issues that are the base of the skills of the 21st century. One, not everybody learns the same thing at the same time. It's personalized education. and you build the knowledge of the group. So children are learning to dialogue, interact constantly. This is taking us to a new role of a teacher, not a teacher that's transmitting information, but one that it's embedded in the 21st century, when information is changing as faster than we're able to absorb it. It motivates, catalyzes. It's an effective reference that has time to feedback the process, to have time to go with those who need it. Those limitations that we had in the rural school were the opportunity to innovate. So it's very important because nowadays these are the skills of the 21st century, to learn to be leaders of the processes, have initiative and work as a team.
We are having a unique experience in Brazil, and we have the privilege of having a person who has brought a revolution in a city in the border of Mexico and the United States, a very violent region. So I would like, Professor, to hear from you. What did you think about when you saw that method that you needed to introduce change? What motivated you to bring about this change, and how did you manage? Because one of your students, for example, came in first place in the national exams in Mexico. So tell us about your experience.
La invitación. Es mi primera vez en Brasil, conociendo.
And knowing the city of Rio, and yes, we were able to obtain many things due to the fact that we were able to see the need of the children, the students. It was very difficult due to the situation of the context, extreme poverty, violence. But we wanted to have something new, create something different, not to maintain the same traditional system in which the teacher tries to feel a container, but deal with the children for what they are, human beings. So, due to this need, we found ourselves in the situation of investigating and researching for new methods of working. The idea of the Escuela Nueva to organize the children in teams, the students in teams. We tried to innovate, and that was a great progress that children, seeing this new way of working with them, they really accepted it in an excellent way. Dealing with education more than a theoretical issue and a practical issue.
But please, Professor, give us an example. I know that you did research on the internet, on methods and teachers who motivated you to introduce this change. So please, tell us how you motivated and encouraged these children. How did you tell them that they can?
Many times I've been asked the work that we worked and the way that we worked. And one of the methods and the ways of working that we wanted to include was one of Professor Sugata Mitra from India. He carried an experiment with the children in India, very poor communities. He gave them a computer, and he let them have their own experience with their own ideas with the computer and experiment with it and do something with them. And they were able to obtain fantastic things. And taking this idea as a base, we said, well, we don't have computers. We have nothing in multimedia, but we are willing to and the talent of children. The children have the talent. It's something that's embedded in them. So we tried to do this with what we had, and trying them to experiment, talk among themselves, and then teams, due to ideas and work, will be by themselves to obtain the knowledge, and we, teachers, were the support of them in this learning process. They are able to obtain more knowledge and more favorable for them.
Now we have a provocation for one of our persons in Brazil who has very interested in education, and we felt you were very excited and interested in the problem, Mr. Johan Peter. And do you think that this experience in Mexico could be multiplied in Brazil, especially in the high-risk areas? Yes, it is quite unquestionable that these examples of innovation, of bringing innovation through the conventional educational system, are a crucial need. We have here in Brazil research done by the work of Todos pela Educação program, All for Education, and we had 15 articles produced by the Globo newspaper showing the poorest schools in the northeast of Brazil, which presented the best results. I myself have a certain unrest with regards to all of this because we still lack within our educational process. Why are our rates so low? There is something wrong in the relationship between training our teachers and the labor relations, the communication aspect. There are failures in this process. So the most normal thing in the world, in the economic world, is to do research on the benchmark, on the best practices.
The processes that have worked, like the new school or the case of Mexico, for instance. What I would say is that in our modern world, we need to use the best practices, which is the internationally coined term. This is something that we need to work with in education, an open discussion. What actually happens in the relationship we have with quality in education? We have amazing examples, such as the one from Mexico. So we need to learn more. We need to know what was actually done. Something that we see that is always a constant is the professors, the teachers' attitude of trying to engage students in the process, to engage children in the process. So what I would say is that maybe we should create a system that currently is done with computer education. Editora Abril, the publishing house, has a specific activity with schools, and they use practical examples, and they give a practical example. But I believe that this should be in the main global conversations on education, because only when we develop and consider best practices that we can actually move forward, and not just keeping this structure that we have. If I don't solve things and I don't get to results, I need to understand what I'm doing, what is wrong here, what is not working. And we have surveys that are done on this, because currently we understand that the education course in universities here are only academic and theoretical, and they don't deal with the practical issues of actually educating children. So we need to be humble and actually acknowledge that the things that we are doing are not working. We need to work on what we are doing and seek for the best practices. And this should be done for every human activity. And with the structures that we have in schools and the corporativism aspect, we need to consider that many teachers that are idealistic about their profession end up losing this because of the lack of communication. The relationship between the children and the teachers is something that needs to be discussed and analyzed. Therefore, when we look at these two examples here on the stage, when we move forward and understand in humility that we need to learn from them, what do we need to learn? We need to learn this aspect between of the relationship between children and the teachers. My wife is involved in many volunteering activities, and she always says, nothing can replace love and this attitude towards building a relationship. If you don't invest in this, it won't work. Like any other activity, we are permanently looking at the world and trying to find best practices. So why don't we look at this from an educational perspective? 70 to 80% of the professionals just stay in that system and are not happening, and we forget about children. Children need to be considered. Who's the client here? The child. And unfortunately, the child doesn't get a vote. And we need to consider their opinion in our improving process. Now, Minister Neri, we want to hear your opinion, sir, because we are talking about early childhood, children that are from age 0 to 5 years old, and I keep thinking about the role of families in this. We were talking backstage, and we were saying that we need to consider the involvement of mothers, how the community is also engaged, and obviously teachers. Now, considering specifically early childhood, how do you see things? How do you think we could make a revolution? How can we get these children and help them in their educational training? Because when they get to schools, such as the school that Teacher Correa here is already working with, they will be ready to receive all the stimuli that they will receive. Thank you very much for this invitation. It is a great honor to be on a panel with people that have such relevant opinion in this topic. And Cristina, you worked on a very important series on education on GloboNews. I agree with what you just said, and I believe that this is very important. I was talking to Dr. Gerdau before that the greatest return rate, internal return rate that we have in education is found in good actions for early childhood. This is a data that we find here in Brazil. We never had a Brazilian that won the Nobel Prize, and I believe that this reflects some of our education problems. We are a large country, but there was an American that received the Nobel Prize, James Hackman, and we called him, and he was an American that worked here in Brazil, and we called him, and he said, I will go, but only if you invite me to talk about early childhood. And this was 15 years ago. And we understood then that this was important, and he realized that this is the greatest internal rate of return that we have. Why is it that? Because you're investing in the way that people start their life. So any transformation that you end up undertaking is something that will surpass that stage and that will be transferred to the whole life of that person. And it's a time of transformation, because if you change something at 4 years old or 4 months or during pregnancy, this has truly an impact in the whole development of that human being. And the third aspect that I would like to highlight is that children are the poorest segment in our society. The poverty rate was 8 times higher than elderly adults. So for you to invest in this phase, in this stage of life, because in Brazil we universalized basic education. We have a great challenge in high school education, secondary education in general, and this is a public challenge, but the initial frontier, early childhood, hasn't been targeted yet. There is an initiative done by Claudia Constin, Ricardo Paes de Barros, with whom I've learned so much. And it is amazing the ability of transportation that a project geared toward early childhood, especially with poorer families, can have. This is the frontier that we need to invest in. This will increase all the efforts, and that will improve many other areas in education. We were able to find that out, I wouldn't say late, but it's something that we need to work more towards. There was a question that Dr. Gerdau made. He said, why hasn't education been a priority in Brazil? This is a great question. We would need a lot of time to answer. But I believe that the answer is probably in early childhood, because education is something frustrating because it is influenced by family background, by family history. Families that are poor end up creating and raising children that are also poor and that don't have access to education. So if we look at experiences such as the one in Mexico and Colombia and others, it brings us to understand that we need to tackle early childhood. So the message that I'm trying to send is, if we are looking for an internal rate of return for every penny that we spend in our country, we need to invest in education. We are not doing this because people are not mobilized. We need to mobilize people towards early childhood. Considering the issue of children not being voters, I believe that this is something that we need to consider. That's precisely what was said before. Just an observation, inside a structure that would need to consider the goals that a country needs to focus on in a democratic country is providing equal opportunities. I will never provide equal opportunities if we consider the excluded amount of children that we have in Brazil. We can continue to invest in education, but if we don't intervene in this first stage of life during the pregnancy, if we don't invest in healthy eating habits for children up until 3 years old, if we don't invest in cognitive stimuli up to the first ages of early childhood, we will never get anywhere. He was talking about the best return that we have, but providing equal opportunities, if we don't target early childhood, we will never be able to provide equal opportunities for people. The day before yesterday, I was reading an indicator that said that we still have 5 million children that are undernourished in Brazil. And this is something appalling. We need to advance in this area. We need to target this. And we already have a specific research that were done before. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I needed to say this. Would you like to say something?
Well, I also would like to make 2 additional comments. One with regards to to the infancy, because that's something we've heard about for many years. There's scientific evidence that says that the infancy investments are key for human progress. There are scientific and moral arguments that favor that idea, that says that the first 5 years are key. In Brazil, we have seen that. I have worked in UNICEF for Latin America and the Caribbean. I had the opportunity to be in touch with the whole region. And there is a Brazilian experience who was carried out by the Catholic Church, Pastoral da Criança. And the idea was that they were working with 14 countries and then other churches joined in. And the idea was very important because they were mobilizing society in order to work with the infancy years. So there are different strategies regarding that, and I was inspired by the Brazilian experience. And we have developed this behavior, this 10 basic behavior every family should know about. So these strategies, they complement each other, and we should be focusing on them. When it comes to schooling, it's very important to acknowledge that the schools themselves should be changing in order to welcome these children. And the idea is the same, and I'll give you an example. Children work in small groups in this kinder phase, this preschooling phase. And then when they get older, we interrupt this group work. So those schools, they are concerned about childhood development. So, and that's the bridge we have to build. So Escuela Nueva, but not only Escuela Nueva, thousands of schools carried out this change, and we did it in rural areas with displaced population because of the Colombia civil conflict. So it really created an impact, not only in the academy achievements, but also in citizenship. It's very deep change, but for that we have to look at through different eyes. It's very important when it comes to the infancy years to take into account this basic foundings and the basic education, kinder, secondary schools in Mexico at least. Those are the ones we care less about. Universities, they get the best infrastructure investments. When basic education schools, they are the most needed ones in order to achieve the challenge this new century has proposed to us. And since things are changing so fast, our school, is already out of date. We should be changing the methodologies of traditional schools. We have to forget about knowing things by heart. We should be changing the way we evaluate the children. It's not only about quantity, but we should be focusing on quality. The student should be able to express him or herself, because we cannot give a 6 to Pedro, even if when he has more difficulties to come to school than Juan that lives in a completely different environment. We should be changing the evaluations, and we should be focusing on those children, on the younger children. I think you
talked about interesting things. You said that the schools are outdated.
O que a gente pode fazer para estimular essa criança? Eu sei que é uma pergunta difícil, não é uma resposta fácil, mas é uma pergunta fundamental. Eu gostaria de lançar essa pergunta para todos vocês. O que nós podemos fazer?
I would like you to think, what can you do so that these can be schools that will motivate children? perfect. I believe that your question is extremely important. In my opinion, there are many important characters for education. We have the governments, the Department of Education, principals, teachers, parents. But for me, the main character in education is the student. If a student is not convinced that this will be worth it, and many times in campaigns we see actors, we see them showing that this is something easy, but studying is hard. This is something that you need to be engaged in and insist upon so that you can actually find pleasure in. And I believe that we should focus students. We need to remember, we need to think of this question. We asked, for example, teenagers here in Brazil, we have a problem of students dropping out of school. Students from 15, 16 to 17, they don't want to go to school anymore. And this is our problem in secondary education. So we asked them, why are you not in school? Weren't you able to register? Do you need to work? Are you poor? And they say, I'm not interested in that. Schools, and this is completely connected to what was said before, if we don't have a school that is interesting for students at any stage in life, you are not able to get them. You're not able to bring them in. And the question was asked before, why do we in Brazil have such low levels in education, in a qualitative aspect and a quantitative aspect as well? Well, this is a virtuous cycle that we took longer to engage in. I believe that now we can work on it because education is the second priority in Brazil. There is a poll that is showing that it will become the first one, right there with health. I believe that we are also experiencing this movement that was started by Dr. Gerdau, called Todos pela Educação, all for education. There are education goals from the federal government. So this is a movement in society that allows us to know what we're trying to get. So we have all of these tools, early childhood education, students being interested in. If we know where we are and where we are trying to get, answers will come about naturally. I'm very positive about this.
Well, in my view, this is a very complex and difficult question. I am in doubt whether the process is individualized for children, and this makes it hard to cope with this theme as any other theme would be dealt with. But what I would say is that presently we require research. We require tools and research on this theme. So very humbly, I would say, and this is exactly the theme I mean to elaborate on. The central concern is the child. And except for these individual cases, punctual cases, when you have a teacher who decides to worry about the children. Well, very recently in Rio Grande do Sul state, we had an example in the trade union association. They made a list of requirements, but none of the themes considered children or improvements in education. So in any human activity, the first and foremost thing is the client. And in the Brazilian process, not only in Brazil, but worldwide, we hear about this everywhere, that the interests of power and corporation and political interests are always more important than children. And I am very revolted with this. It's like an organization, a company. The politicians themselves, when they are in campaigning, they show some concern with the voters, but unfortunately it's only in that period. The process has to turn around children. How can we improve their relationships? And Minister, you mentioned this also when you said that historically education did not have to fight or compete with television and computer games. We have to look at all this in a comprehensive way and see what can be done. My second point, anything concerning human activity requires intelligent contracts or agreements. So what kind of agreement should we develop for the system to work? Teachers need maybe varied compensation linked to results, because if you hunt, you will eat. If you don't hunt, you will not eat. That is human. So in any human system, you have to involve humans, give them the right conditions, but also guide them. So I think we have to go back to this permanent, cyclic process, and this has to go on forever because societies change, the external environments change, we have to adjust to them, and maybe we are educating like we did 2,000 years ago with the Greeks. And today's world, with all the changes, with all the new resources and possibilities, so what is defining any one of you here? And I do this in my personal research. My 2 or 3 good professors I had in life, I don't even remember their names, and I don't even look for them today. I don't know if they're alive, how they're living. So what makes a good professor, a good teacher? Let us ask our teacher. We are discussing a very important word, which is stimulus, motivation. And one of the great merits of your work is motivation exactly, is going to a child, to a student, and saying, you can. What makes us remember our good teachers?
Sí, creo que lo que se comenta aquí es bien importante en relación al alumno.
Important, which is the key part. Which strategic points the teacher should be taken into account when it comes to educating and take part of that family? In the PTA meetings, we usually it's usually done like that. The teacher talks to the parents and the students are out of the room. And that's not good, I think. The students should be coming in too, because those are the 3 education pillars: the teacher, the parents, and the students. The student should be there. He should not be detached from what's going on. So I do believe those are the key issues we should be dealing with, and we should base our strategies on that. And another strategy that we've been trying to implement is to use what they want as a starting point. The textbooks, the contents, they should be developed around that. We should. Therefore, it's important to know about what they are interested into, because maybe they're interested in the universe or in the free fighting, things like that. And that's a very significant learning process, and that we should be able to make it more entertaining and more touching, if we approach the subjects they are interested in, because they are very talented naturally.
And how can we bring together the playful activities which are so important for the education of a child, with learning and with stimulus to creativity. In your school model, you managed to unite the children's curiosity with being in a classroom, with a permanent curiosity that children have, with all their neurons so active and awake. What would you bring from your experience that could be multiplied throughout Latin America?
As I've said, theory is not new. We have known it from over 100 years now. The philosophy is not new either. What has been going on in Latin America is that the philosophy have reached the elite institutions, but not the poor schools with low resources. So what we have achieved was something that could be easily replicated for every teacher with a master's degree. So how can we make every teacher to be able to change their class? Respecting those principles, active learning, a child that is able to take initiatives, to make decisions. But in order to achieve that, we had to work hard. We had to change paradigms, the teaching, the learning paradigm. So we have to focus the learning process on the student. And also a new role for the teacher. That's something that he has been doing in Mexico, such a wonderful success. And that's what they have been telling us about role-changing models. Because, to introduce PC computers in class without changing the model won't matter. What is key, what we should be focusing on is on the teaching changes, how to teach the learning and teaching process by giving them concrete supports, not only the theory. So what have we done? We have changed this complexity because educational processes are very complex. So we have changed that into a very simple action that can be replicated. Because they have decided after the pilot project, they decided to replicate it all over Colombia. So it's an evidence-based process. The peasant children, they have been studying, and they are as talented as the urban ones. So, but not only language and mathematics, but also pacific conviviality, which is key to us in Colombia. So, yes, things can be done, but we have to work harder, and we must not follow the political movements. And that's why Brazil's example is very inspiring to Latin America, because it means that the civil society is involved as well, and not only the public sector. And those are part of our food for thought.
This is very important. Education is a responsibility of all. We know that. And what has been growing exactly are the public and private partnerships. We always place great responsibility on the state, and maybe it is too heavy a responsibility for the government. So let us develop on the public-private partnerships, and how can we replicate this model in Latin America? Presently, we have an association, All for Education, Todos pela Educação, which is being replicated in different scales. It is a model of education that is being replicated. We were very fortunate in choosing the name All for Education. And, well, I would say that the most important aspect is that we kept the word all in our name. We interact with the ministries of education, with the different departments of education, with different entities. Of course, there are conflicts, but the goal of the movement has been conquered and carried out. And when we began the movement, we were ranking 6th or 7th place in education, and we were able to improve with a mobilization brought about by the communication media, all the global entities talking about education, and this was very decisive. But this is a quantitative aspect. Our next goal is the qualitative aspect. And this is why we are thinking about how we can involve and engage parents. And with that, I would cover your question of about how much we should engage children. I would say that all stakeholders need to participate in the process, but in reality, you have touched upon a theme which is government's responsibility. I'm in doubt about the government's responsibility because society developed, and it's our responsibility. We delegate this to the government, this responsibility, but when it doesn't work, I feel responsible myself as a citizen. When we have an education rate that is so low, and in my vision as a citizen, I outsourced this education, this responsibility. I'm paying a fortune for it, but my responsibility does not disappear when I delegate the responsibility of educating to the government. Because when we throw this responsibility to the government and it doesn't work, it does not fulfill the demands that society requires, then who is responsible? Who is to blame? It is the whole set of citizens. So the very strong involvement of citizens in the educational process, with the child being the weakest link in this chain, I say that we have to debate this very clearly and profoundly. And parents, we have a great percentage of parents who are illiterate or almost illiterate, and they think that they will solve the problem by sending their children to school. And this is only the first step. It is co-responsibility what we need. We need to work to develop this awareness that parents are the strongest link. And I was also paying attention to the aspect that maybe we're not developing the unconscious in children, because every work has to work upon all the stakeholders. This is the most important, the crucial thing in the corporation. If you want to survive, you need to satisfy all your stakeholders. If I want to have a successful TV channel, I need to involve and bring success to all the stakeholders. So maybe in this process, we have not reached the child yet. So delegating everything to the government and leave it all in their hands is not sufficient to meet the goals. Outsourcing irresponsibly is something that does not work. And I speak of this very openly, and thank God I had the opportunity to learn. But the best thing is that investment in education is the best business, because you replicate it. You can improve 10% of a person, and this is a indefinite improvement that you can provide. These figures you mentioned about early childhood, I haven't paid attention to these numbers, but what would 10% of improvement in the education of a whole population mean in terms of amounts. We haven't estimated that. So this is our responsibility. It's not the government responsibility. It's the worst thing to say that it's a government's responsibility. We outsource this and we have to work on it. Well, unfortunately, we have a limited time window here to discuss such an important theme. I would like to close our discussion with a round of comments. There is this myth that children who are not assisted and supported in their 5 or 6 first years of life, they become hopeless. Is this easy? Is this possible to reverse this situation? You had this experience with your students. Do you think you can reverse the situation?
I think that the first years are not the definite ones. We have been observing and checking on children around 8, 9 years old. They can achieve beautiful things if they are given the opportunity. That's the infancy, yes, if we achieve that. If they come very strong, they will achieve great things. But that's not the only way to go. It's not a final argument. I've met people with 30 years of age that they were able to achieve a profession due to their efforts and hard work. And they were able to finish the schooling and they were able to do great things. So it depends on the motivation, on if you want to achieve great things. It's not only the genetics, but it's if you really have the will and the power to grow, that will make a difference. We have to put our grain of sand in order to achieve great citizens. And we are all committed to this learning process. It's not only one pillar defining it. We should all be involved and should be committed to improving our children's lives so we can reverse the situation. We know the first 5 years, they are key, but if this low resource child has not had access to this first part, the school has to change to unlock the human potential, to develop human potential. But in order to achieve that, the school has to change also. And in order to achieve that, I think we should be comparing it with the health system. If we have one doctor, and if we take a 100 years old doctor, the doctor will be lost, completely lost. Everything has been changing and he won't understand anything. But if we do the same with a teacher, it's not the same because everything has changed except the learning process. So that's the reflection I would like to bring to you, because the schools should be adapting to children's development.
I would say that this is not a lost cause. On the contrary, the difference is that the process is more efficient and more economical if it happens in early childhood. But if we don't work with eating habits, if we don't work at being loving and cared for, there are surveys that show that you can develop different types of brain consequences and cognitive problems if you don't receive enough love as you're a child. So I believe that there are ways that we can educate in the best conditions possible. We need to work, we need to invest more, but certainly this will not be something that I will disconsider. I would also like to talk about what Zilda Arns said, a program like the one that Vicky mentioned that helps children all over the country against dehydration, and it costs R$1.60. Therefore, when things are done with a lot of volunteers involving many people, the costs go down. We should not forget to mention this, since she mentioned Zilda Arns, who was the person who designed this project called the Pastoral da Criança. Therefore, this can be something highly economical. Should be an encouragement to show us how we can work in social aspects. It's a great question. Of course, this is not something that is lost. 5 years, as it was said before, is something easier, something better, considering economical efficiency of the system and the way that people can work, not only in Brazil, but in other areas. We are losing the war here. We are not moving forward. I'm very positive about working with youth, and I think Sergio's experience in Mexico is very important, and we need to understand that we have not been doing our best with young people. We cannot lure them in. We have problems in making things attractive to them, and focusing on early childhood is very important because young people go through a lot of transformation. They are changing more and more, so we need to look ahead and we need to start early to make this process more powerful. I believe this panel has something very beautiful in it because we are considering different countries, different cities, and considering this motto, all for education, or education for all. There is a group of Brazilians led by Dr. Gerdau and different other leaders in the elite of the country, because the elite in Brazil was never so interested in education, and this new elite is concerned with education. And I liked what you called me, young or new. I believe then there is something very interesting related to the Brazilian tradition that takes on everything that happens outside of Brazil and changes and transforms, because bringing education, this education for all, we don't want the same education for all. You're Mexican, you're Colombian, I'm Brazilian, we're Brazilian, and we need to change things. And I believe that experiences such as this, all for education, Zilda Arns' experience, Vicky's experience, Sergio's experience, we have all the instruments to do this revolution. And I think that having a panel like this with this name on it, talking about early childhood, is a great sign. We cannot forget what Dr. Gerdau said, the importance of love. This is a magical word and an efficient word for every age. We need to start with our own children. I just wanted to say that Bernardo Toro has in YouTube with the word cuidado in Portuguese. It's a 10-minute video. And he said, we need to care for people. That's what cuidado means. We need to care for our body, our spirit, our family, our friends, and the planet. And so the word care is very important. So please let us care for our children in early childhood.
Essa atitude, cuidado, é chave.